Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of St. Ambrose and the Army of the Dead. Now, last time we looked at how Ambrose of Milan presented himself as a champion of orthodoxy, of true Christian belief, against heresy, against incorrect Christian belief, and one of the ways in which he sought to demonstrate the righteousness of his position was to call on the support of the martyrs Protasius and Gervasius, whose bodies he dug up near Milan, and the location of those bodies was revealed to Ambrose in a vision. And we saw that as a result of gaining these saintly allies, Ambrose was able to withstand the attacks that were being launched against him by the heretical Empress Justina. So the living Ambrose and this army of dead saints of Protasius and Gervasius were really important to the victory of Christian orthodoxy at Milan. And we saw that one of the things that happens is that Ambrose becomes closely associated with Protasius and Gervasius, as we can see in this 5th century mosaic, which shows Ambrose standing at the centre, flanked by the two martyrs on either side. And indeed, in the crypt of the Basilica of Sant Ambrogio, where Ambrose was buried and where that mosaic is located, we have the relics of Ambrose himself. You can see him here wearing episcopal robes at the centre, flanked by the relics, by the skeletons of Protasius and Gervasius that he excavated. So this shows that even after his death, Ambrose is associated with these two saints, and it also shows that Ambrose himself became a saint. And that presentation of Ambrose as a saint is something that begins very quickly after his death in the year 397. And it built on his career as a champion of true faith against false belief, particularly against heresy. And the association of Ambrose with sainthood and the view that he himself was a saint begins almost from the moment of his death in 397. We are told that when he died, the announcement of his death, he died around Easter 397, so he died on Easter 397. His death was followed by great public demonstrations of grief. I'll say a little bit more about those in a moment. We saw that Ambrose was also an important figure for other Christians. For example, we looked in the last of these videos at how it is Augustine of Hippo who tells us, or gives us one version of what happened in that discovery of the relics of Gervasius and Protasius. Now, Augustine associated Ambrose with his rediscovery of true Christianity, and therefore Augustine was quite devoted to Ambrose's memory. One of the ways in which he showed this was by commissioning one of Ambrose's priests, a priest of the Church of Milan called Paulinus, to write a life of Ambrose. And what's interesting about Paulinus's life of Ambrose is that it tells us not just about the miracles that happen after, tells us not just about his lifetime, but also about the miracles that happen after his death. This is a brief summary of what Paulinus tells us. He tells us that as soon as Ambrose died, so at Easter 397, his death was followed by people claiming to have seen him going about his normal duties, sitting in his episcopal throne, walking through the church in Milan, or the churches in Milan, all of this showing that although he was dead, his spirit lived on. We're also told that during his funeral procession, that contact with his body, and indeed contact with anything that itself had come into contact with his body, exorcised demons from the possessed, so people who were being driven mad by demonic possession, when they came into contact with Ambrose's body, or with cloths that had been rubbed against Ambrose's body, they were cured of that possession. We're also told that after Ambrose's death, those who tried to denigrate his reputation, I think Paulinus is hinting here that Ambrose was something of a controversial figure, but we're told that anyone who tried to denigrate Ambrose's reputation was struck down. We hear about individuals who tried to sort of undermine Ambrose's reputation and his memory, and how they fell ill and died. And we also hear about various visions that are had of Ambrose after his death, including a number in the context of military conflicts. And Paulinus, in introducing these stories, tells us that the grace of Ambrose as bishop remains not only in that place, that is, in Milan itself, but even in a great many provinces, even to this day. So Paulinus is promoting the reputation of Ambrose as a saint, and is using these post-mortem miracles as a way of supporting his argument that Ambrose is a saintly figure. Let's look at one of these miracles in particular, which gives an indication of how about a decade, just 9 years after Ambrose's death, that a vision of Ambrose occurs at a time when the Italian city of Florence was being besieged by Goths, a group of Goths under the leadership of a leader called Radagaisus. They had invaded northern Italy, they had crossed the North Italian plain, they had crossed into Tuscany, and they had besieged the city of Florence. And Paulinus tells us that at this time the citizens of Florence despaired. They thought that they were going to be overcome by the Goths. But we're told that in the midst of this siege, Ambrose, now 9 years after his death, appeared to a certain man and promised that safety would come to them the following day. So what we have is a vision of Ambrose 9 years after his death, while the city of Florence is being besieged, and the promise that Ambrose gives in this vision is fulfilled, because the very next day the spirits of the citizens of Florence revive, and the very next day the leader, the commander-in-chief of the Western Imperial armies, an individual called Stilicho, who may be represented in the ivory shown on the screen, arrived and defeated Radagaisus's Goths. So what we have then is a story of a vision of Ambrose, as a miraculous vision of Ambrose happening 9 years after his death, promising that the Goths will be defeated, and his promise is shown to be true because of the arrival the next day of the imperial forces. Now again, as I've looked at in a number of these in these videos, this might be associated with this sort of descent into medieval Christian superstition. But in fact, these sorts of visions and visions associated with moments of military crisis can be found not just in Christian writings, but in pagan ones also. Writing about a century after Paulinus wrote his Life of Ambrose, we have a pagan philosopher called Damascus writing an account of the life of his own teacher, another philosopher called Isidore. And in it, Damascus tells the story of what happened when the Huns invaded Italy in the early 450s. He claims that when Attila's forces invaded Italy, now his account is not entirely accurate, because it has Attila's forces reaching Rome, which they never did. But the story is interesting nonetheless. He claims that there was a great battle between the Romans and the Huns in front of the city of Rome, so it gives the impression that this happened right outside Rome. It gives a rather exaggerated account that that all the soldiers on both sides were killed, except for the generals and their immediate bodyguards. But the strangest thing of all is that when the various combatants fighting the battle fell, their bodies having failed, he goes on to say that they still stood there fighting with their souls for 3 whole days and nights, without in any way being inferior in battle to the living in physical strength or courage. And he says the phantoms could indeed be seen and heard confronting each other, and rattling their weapons, and this went on for 3 days. And he follows this account, which survives only in fragments, sadly, with other examples of ghosts continuing to fight on the battlefield long after the troops themselves had died. So visions of the dead are not purely to be associated with Christianity. They are instead to be found more broadly in the religious literature of this late antique period. What this shows is that this descent into superstition is not purely a feature of Christianity. It's these visions are a much more widespread phenomenon. And here's a vision I thought was pretty cool. That's it. Bye.